Hello, story lovers, welcome back to the fireside. If you haven't heard of the story of the girl who defeated the witch with the help of a talking calabash, then come with me as we return to a time when humans and spirit lived side by side and shared the earth as neighbors. As all good stories begin with once upon a time, we stumble upon a time when a little village knew no peace. You see, this village had a problem. They were very unlucky. Their kings were wicked and made harsh laws for no reason. There was oppression and corruption in the land. Kings dethroned kings to make the land better, but each new king, as soon as he took over power, was worse than the last. Now, in this same village lived Amina. Amina wasn't an average girl. She possessed strange abilities. Some said she could hear the wind speak. In fact, people feared her, and quite a few people even avoided her because of this. Some said Amina's strange ability made them uneasy. So Amina had very few friends and spent most of her time alone. One day, while Amina was weeding around her grandmother's farm, a light breeze brushed past her and the wind whispered to her as usual. But this time, the wind carried a peculiar sound. It was a voice crying for help. Amina followed the voice to the cave deep inside the forest. Inside the cave, nestled among forgotten trinkets and cursed objects, sat a dusty calabash. The voice which was coming from the calabash grew louder and clearer. "Help me, Amina," it pleaded. Amina was both startled and curious. Nonetheless, she picked up the calabash. "Who are you?" she asked. Her voice was barely a whisper. "I am the voice of Baba, a powerful warrior trapped by a wicked witch." And so, the voice began to tell Amina of how he became trapped in the calabash. And Amina sat with the calabash and listened to his tale. A long time ago, there was a witch who lived in Baba's village. She terrified the people of the village and made life unbearable for them. She made babies monstrous and even she would destroy the crops of her enemies. Anyone who dared to question her suffered for it. Nobody could stand up to her, not even the king. Until one day, the bravest of the king's men gathered to find a solution and find a way to defeat this powerful witch. The solution was not simple, but it had to be done. They had to get the calabash of the spirits, a strong container that could only be found in the land across the dry roads where the spirits lived. Since Baba was the bravest of all the brave warriors in the village, Baba was sent out by his tribesmen to go and collect the calabash of the spirits. He traveled through fearful forest and man-eating lake until he found the calabash and brought it home. But before Baba returned home, the news of his quest had spread across the land and the wicked witch had heard of it. So, she possessed Baba's wife, Oma, and took on her body, so that when Baba returned home and hugged his wife, the witch who was in the body of his wife took his face and gave Baba her own likeness. Then, wearing Baba's body, she dragged Baba, whom she had turned into her likeness, to the village square where the king's men gathered to conduct the ritual that would forever get rid of the witch. The king's men refused to listen to Baba, as Baba in the witch body tried to warn them that they were making a mistake. No matter how much she pleaded, the men did not believe her, did not believe Baba. The king's men went ahead and imprisoned Baba in the calabash, thinking that it was the witch, while the witch took on Baba's identity and later assumed the throne. To prevent Baba's wife from spilling the truth, the witch made her mad and kept her locked up in the palace for the rest of her life, while the calabash was hidden in the cave in the deep of the forest with other cursed items. When Amina heard this story, Amina felt sorry for the poor Baba who had been trapped in the calabash for all these years. She volunteered to free him if he could tell her how to help. Baba informed her that the only way he could be freed was by the hands of those who had placed him in the calabash prison in the first place. But how could she find these men who had placed the curse on Baba? They were long dead. But Baba, however, reminded her that even though they were long dead, their sons were still alive and still lived and ruled with the king as the king's men in their father's place. All Amina had to do was to find the present king's men and convince them to free Baba's spirit from the calabash. But this mission would prove very difficult because Amina was only a young girl. She had to be courageous. Well, how else could she convince these men to free Baba from the calabash? She thought of abandoning the calabash and continuing with her life, but she could not stop hearing the voice of the wind, the voice of Baba as the wind dragged his pleas to her ears. Day and night she heard Baba's voice in her ears, pleading with her to let him out of his prison. She could not find a moment of peace until she finally returned to the cave and picked up the calabash and marched to the palace, determined to free Baba. On getting to the palace gates especially, the guards would not let Amina in as she was a child and had no business in the palace. So she convinced them that the calabash was a gift for the king and his king's men. When the king was informed of a young girl with a gift for him, he was curious. Nobody ever brought gifts to the king because he was a cruel king. He was a very wicked king. Overjoyed at the prospect of receiving a gift, he asked that Amina be let into the palace. Now, Amina went into the palace and stood before the king and his king's men, and she presented the calabash to the king along with her request. She retold the story that Baba had told her and begged the king's men to help free Baba. In return, the king could have the calabash of the spirit as his own. After hearing of Amina's request, the king and his king's men laughed at her because unlike Amina, they could not hear Baba's pleas. Besides, the king's men agreed that if their fathers had placed Baba in the calabash, then it was for a good reason and he deserved to remain locked up in there. With this, they dismissed Amina and asked her to return the calabash to where she had found it. Amina, however, refused to return the calabash to the cave and kept it hidden behind her grandmother's hut. At night, the king could not sleep. He paced around in his chambers thinking about Amina and the calabash. For you see, the king was no king at all. In fact, he was the wicked witch, disguised in the body of a man that she had stolen, just as she had stolen Baba's body in the days of old. She had lived from body to body for many years and enjoyed the best things in life by remaining in the palace and inhabiting the bodies of kings. Whenever a new king conquered or inherited the throne, the witch would take over the king's body and begin to live as the king. She had also long forgotten of the existence of the calabash, which she convinced the king's men to trap Baba in. Now, since the discovery of this calabash could be a major threat to her good life, she decided to fortify herself in order to secure her place in the palace. She drank potions after potions and tried charms after charms to protect herself, but she could not stop herself from worrying or feeling threatened. By morning, once again, she possessed the body of the king and took her place on the throne. But one thing was on her mind. She had to find that calabash and immediately destroy it. The witch in the king's body then made a decree that Amina and the calabash be brought to the palace. When Amina returned to the palace, however, she brought with her an ordinary calabash. But the witch could tell the difference and demanded that Amina be killed if she could not provide the real calabash. The king's men were, however, not in agreement with the king regarding the killing of a child who had committed no crime, and they voiced their disagreement. But the witch wanted Amina dead because if she was no more, then the truth of the calabash would never come to light and the crying voice of Baba will remain unheard. So the council disagreed with the king, and the king had no other option but to free Amina. The king began to nurse a kind of anger against this king's men. The witch was very angry with all the king's men who would not let her have her way, as she hated to be questioned or challenged. She then began to take them out one by one, offering some poison and eliminating some with the aid of the palace guards, until only 5 king's men were left. Now, on a certain day, one of the palace guards named Kali was sent to eliminate the 5th king's man. But when he got there, he could not do it, as he was a very honest man and he remembered that this particular king's man had always been very kind to him. He couldn't repay the king's man's good deeds to him with evil. So instead, he warned the king's man of the king's plot and how he had set out to eliminate all the king's men. Scared, the king's man packed up his family and decided to run off at first light. But as he made preparations to leave with his family, the wind brought words of this planned escape to Amina. Amina quickly rushed to the king's man and begged him not to leave the fate of the village at the mercy of the wicked king, because the king's men were the only true protectors of the village, as they knew when to curtail the king's ego and they represented the interest of the people. If the king disposed of all the king's men, then he could do whatever he wanted with the village. For this reason, Amina begged the king's man not to leave, but to do his duty and check the king's excesses. The king's man was very surprised and wanted to know how Amina had discovered his plan to escape. And she told him of her gift. Hearing about Amina's ability to listen to the wind, he became convinced of the fact that she may have truly heard Baba in the calabash and decided to find out the truth for himself. He thus called a meeting with the remaining king's men and told them of the king's plot and of Amina's gift, and begged them to help release Baba so that they may at least get to the bottom of this matter. Even though the king's men feared that they might be unleashing a deadly evil, they took a chance and performed the ritual to free Baba, because they too were curious as to why the king was so obsessed with finding this calabash that he would kill the king's men to achieve his aim of getting his hands on it by all means. As soon as they had said the prayers and spoken the words of the liberating incantation, poof! Baba's spirit emerged from the calabash, wearing the body of the witch, as he had been on the day that he was locked up in the calabash. The king's men were apprehensive at first, but Baba confirmed the story that Amina had told at the king's court of the witch's evil deed and how he got trapped in the calabash. As the king's men were still pondering on all that they had heard, the king heard of the secret meeting being held by the king's men. He charged over to where they were and accused them of treason. Then he saw the now empty calabash, and without thinking, he grabbed it in anger, thinking that Baba and all his secrets was still safe and locked up inside the calabash. However, as the king dived for the calabash, he did not notice the now freed Baba still in the witch's body. As Baba's and in the witch's body was standing by the corner with a veil partly covering the witch's face. As soon as the witch in the king's body noticed that the calabash was now empty, she tossed it aside and knew that the game was up. But before she could say her next words, Baba hugged her from behind. Immediately the witch body touched the king's body. The spirit of the witch was drawn out of the king's body, back into her own body. The king immediately regained his senses, while Baba was drawn into the spirit world, as without a body, he could no longer live in the human world. Now, as the king's men had heard Baba's story and witnessed the liberation of the recent king, who was formerly possessed by the witch, they quickly sprang into action and trapped the witch in the calabash, Thus, Baba was liberated, the witch was overpowered and imprisoned in the calabash, while the new king began to rule in his right mind and made better and kinder laws, so that in the end, the kingdom was saved. Now here's the lesson from this story. We should always be willing and open to hear other people out. And no matter how scary the situation is, we should strive for the truth and we should strive to stand for what is right. Let me know what you think about this story in the comments, and share the lessons you might have learned in the comments. I will see you in the next video. Bye.